Hey everybody, welcome to In Conversation with Jeffrey Gibson and Jess Wilcox. My name is Audrey Demola. I'm the Director of Public Programs at Socrates Sculpture Park. Thank you all for spending your Inauguration Day evening with us. Before we begin our program, I wish to respectfully offer with acknowledgement and gratitude that Socrates Sculpture Park is located in Lenapehoking on the ancestral lands of the Canarsie, Lenape, and Matinecock peoples. So tonight, our conversation is between Jess Wilcox, Socrates Curator and Director of Exhibitions, and artist Jeffrey Gibson. Jeffrey is an interdisciplinary artist based in Hudson, New York, whose artworks make reference to various aesthetic and material histories rooted in Indigenous cultures of the Americas and in modern and contemporary subcultures. He's a recipient of a 2019 MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant, and his previous exhibitions include Jeffrey Gibson, Like a Hammer, organized by the Denver Art Museum, and This is the Day, organized by the Wellen Museum. Jeffrey's work has also been exhibited in the New Museum, Haggerty Museum of Art, Oklahoma Contemporary Arts Center, and Savannah College of Art and Design Museum. So we will be holding space for Q&A towards the later end of the program, so feel free to drop your questions into the chat throughout, or if you're on Facebook Live, feel free to comment. Thank you all again for being with us, and I'm gonna pass the mic over to my colleague, Jess.
Thanks so much for that lovely introduction, Audrey. And thank you, Jeffrey, for being with us tonight and sharing this day, which, you know, I think for many people was a little bit tense. You know, I'm glad transfer of power went smoothly. And I think, you know, actually speaking with you is a really great way to end this day because so much of your work is so forward looking and future looking and brings a positive light. So it seems quite appropriate. So yeah, I mean, for those of you joining us who have not been able to make it to Socrates this, you know, since May, since Jeffrey's work came up. We have a little aerial view of it. Most people haven't seen it from this view, but it's quite a striking piece. You know, you can actually see it from the ferry if you take the ferry over the water, and you know, our neighbors in high rises have commented how wonderfully it looks from their windows. But I encourage everyone to, you know, bundle up and stop by because the exhibition is still still on Monuments Now. It's not over until the end of March. So there's still time to visit in person. But I'm really happy to be able to just have time to, you know, spend with Jeffrey and talk about the piece since we've got to spend time with it, seeing how people interact with it in the park. And then, you know, experience a lot of the really lovely programming you curated essentially. And, you know, I love being able to share that role with artists. But for those people who haven't been able to visit the park or don't know as much about the piece, because once you enter my house, it becomes our house. I thought, you know, you could start with a little bit of background and the kind of the historical background of the work that, you know, you put together when asked to create a monument.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Thank you to everyone at Socrates and for everyone who's joining us tonight. And I'm happy to talk about this piece. I'm not sure that we thought that this day was landing on Inauguration Day. So I feel a bit weird about that. But yeah, I think, you know, I think sometimes I feel like I'm an imposter like scholar because I'm not a scholar by any means. I really am an artist in the way that, you know, just kind of have always explored the world and kind of, I think, allowed my background to direct me into the things that I pay attention to. And so in my early 20s, while I was an undergrad at the Art Institute of Chicago, I also worked as a a research assistant for NAGPRA, which is the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. And it allowed for federally recognized tribes to request repatriation of objects under very specific guidelines that I think were actually quite controversial. Well, and are quite controversial. And so that was a huge kind of leverage to my education as an artist at the Art Institute. And it was there that I discovered or was introduced to Mississippian culture. And, you know, as a child growing up, a lot of the Southeastern tribes, I feel like I never really saw like Choctaw people represented in museums. So when I thought of Choctaw people, it was always my family in Mississippi. And so Mississippian culture was interesting because it really kind of threw me into a pre-Columbian history where the Mississippi Choctaw would have emerged from. And so even though I chose to focus on the structure of Cahokia, which if we can go back one image here, this is what it looks like today, which is in Ohio. I'm sorry, Cahokia is in Illinois. But if, you know, and I was just kind of blown away that in, you know, a major art school, and I'm not just pinpointing the Art Institute because it's kind of across the board, that, you know, these kinds of things aren't put in front of us in terms of the architecture that exists on this continent, and also the achievements of people and civilizations pre-contact. So for me, it was kind of like, I don't know, for lack of a better word, it was sort of like realizing that you have roots deeper than you knew, right? Mm-hmm. And so, and to see yourself named in histories before the ones that were being taught. So I think that kind of threw me into there. And when I chose Cahokia, it's really because this structure is not necessarily where the Mississippi Choctaw would have emerged from. It was a culture, a large Mississippian culture across many states. And so we don't actually have an image of it today, and I apologize for that, but Nanawaya, which is in Mississippi, is what the Mississippi Choctaw will refer to as where we originated from, and many of the Southeastern tribes would have originated from in our creation stories. And so I think, yeah, that was the kind of beginning of it. And this structure just kind of blew me away because it's one of those structures where it's like, how in the world do they possibly build this? Also the fact that it was controversial because it was a fully realized civilization pre-contact, as opposed to the narrative that it was not a civilized land. And there were not these kind of civilizations pre-contact. And so it's really shifted my whole perspective to realize that like modernity happened for so many indigenous nations long before contact. And so it shifted what I think about modernism is, what I think invention is, when it happened, when modernity happens for different cultures. Yeah, it's really kind of broken up all of those ideas for me in a way that's allowed for a lot of space for creative thinking.
Absolutely.
And then the Serpent Mounds.
Yeah, I thought the Serpent Mounds, because that has a you know, references the posters. So
yeah, and the Serpent Mounds also, I mean, these are in Ohio, and you know, most people don't know. In fact, there's no standard narrative as to what they were for. We know that they were earthworks. We know that they were created by the Adena people, and I was just amazed, again, as an artist, to think about earthworks and then to be shown something that was so huge that could only be seen from an aerial view, and just kind of the complexity of making something like that and the labor that goes into it. And then the kind of mystery of not knowing really what it does, you know, what is it for? And so for me, Mississippian culture, because there's so many kind of unanswered questions about the specifics, I feel like as an artist, I gave myself liberty. I shouldn't say no one else gave me liberty. I gave myself liberty to go in and start inventing within that, and to think about the innovations and the design and the kind of creativity that was already there. And as an artist, I feel like I feel very proud to kind of say, like, I'm picking up from these things and I'm continuing, not necessarily to like make work in honor of. It's not that. It's sort of like they give me permission to continue making with the assumption that there is meaning and content within what it is I'm making, right? And so the design is a very abstracted view of thinking about these two ends, which we don't know, which is the head and which is the end. And so it's all speculation. And I just wanted to work with the language of color and graphicness that we use. And we knew early on that we wanted to cover the structure with these posters. And I wanted, you know, my aesthetic has probably been driven. I think about an early piece. It's funny because it relates to the title. A very early piece that I did probably in 2013, I'm gonna guess. It was a beaded text work that said, "Make me feel it." And I remember at the time I was thinking about, and the way it relates to the title of the piece is because the title comes from a song called "Can You Feel It" by Fingers Inc. from 1988. And I remember that song, it just, when I wrote those words, "Make me feel it," it was about recognizing the kind of numbness that I think myself and a lot of Indigenous people and queer people and people of color kind of just endure to kind of live in this society. So we kind of develop this kind of armor that allows us to not feel. So this kind of idea of like wanting this intensity, and I think it shows up in my work in terms of color and pattern. And I actually, when I proposed this to you, I didn't think you would say no. I just couldn't envision what a kind of psychedelic colored pattern ziggurat would look like. And so it was great. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think, going back to, that first image, just how it pops in the landscape. I mean, you know, it's funny, the green, this aerial image is quite interesting because a green space in, you know, New York City alone pops out and stands out as a burst of color in a field of, you know, gray, essentially. And then within that, you know, your work really, you know, just stands out in huge contrast and beauty. So, you know, I love that how you use color and the way you use it. So I was always thrilled.
No, you never gave me any pushback whatsoever. It was funny. I was so focused on the object of the structure that I never envisioned what it would look like against the backdrop of Manhattan. So it wasn't until Laura's performance that I was really taken back and in shock at like the contrast and how much it really created for me the perfect platform for the people that I wanted to be on there and speaking. Yeah, no,
it's a huge contrast. Just going back to sort of your inspiration, and, you know, one of the great things about, you know, learning about the fact that I got to also learn, and our public got to learn about these, you know, pre-Columbian monuments, is just imagining monumentality on that scale. And, you know, like the shapes, these kind of circular shapes that you've created and then transformed into a 2D, you know, we can see them aerially, but, you know, there's also something amazing about thinking about walking around these because they are so monumental, and your work still preserves that feeling of walking around something monumental and having to sort of circumambulate on all sides to take it in, something that you can't take in one glance, essentially. So that's, you know, another relationship that I see and I'm super excited about. But I thought, maybe you could talk a little bit about this image, which was the first sort of performative moment that we had, you know, to open the piece. And we talked about in relationship to land acknowledgement. But, you know, I loved what you had said in choosing Indigenous Kinship Collective, I think, to you know, create the land acknowledgement for this. So do you want to talk a little bit about that and your choice?
I mean, Indigenous Kinship Collective, I've been aware of them, and we, you know, I became friends with Regan and with Roxy in particular and I knew Karina. My gosh, it's probably a couple of years at least before this. And I've just been so impressed. You know, I've lived in New York since 1999, and I've never seen such a kind of organized force of a contemporary voice that I think also really, you know, unapologetically is political and embraces queerness and transness. And I think it's a mix that I've probably been waiting for. Not so much because this is who I identify as, but this is really the expansiveness that we need to see indigeneity in. And I think and I've always credited in particular, like people who identify as women and female with, you know, the kind of matriarchal histories of Indigenous nations. And so to me, I mean, I think I've said this to Regan before. I was either kind of frightened, you know, I was like, can we find a way? And luckily Regan is also Choctaw from Mississippi. So I think that was part of also to find a Choctaw person in New York City who I really shared a lot of views with. And also I find them really challenging to me. You know, I think art and politics are really, everyone is going to have different subjective opinions about what that relationship is. And I have probably spent the better part of my last 10 years, well, more than that, actually, probably since I started making art, trying to figure out where I fit within that spectrum, you know, and how that works within my own practice. I just thought I would read, though, the mission of Indigenous Kinship Collective.
Oh, wonderful, thank you.
I feel like it really, you know, encompasses who they are. We're a community of Indigenous women, femmes, and gender non-conforming folks who gather on Lenni Lenape land to honor each other and our relatives through art, activism, education, and representation. We, as matriarchs, knowledge keepers, center our intersectional narratives by practicing accountability with community and self-determination. We uplift intergenerational Indigenous voices and welcome mixed race, non-enrolled, Indigenous femme, non-binary, trans, two-spirit people. We denounce colonial power structures of leadership and blood quantum. We are circular and work in harmony with each other. We are defined by those who came before us. And so I really love that they're so direct, you know, with their messages. And so when I ask them to do this, I never approach anybody thinking that they're going to say yes, nor do I feel like it's my responsibility to convince them. So they really, I feel like they've just come through for me so many times at this point. And I really see them as, they had to be the voice. You know, you and I talked about land acknowledgements. We had talked about a couple of different kinds of land acknowledgements. And I think I even said to you, this is who I want. And now we see if this is something they feel comfortable with. And so I'm just really thrilled that they did. And I consider them to continue to be partners in my practice. And for anyone who would like to find out more, I mean, their website, but also following them on Instagram, and they produce so many zines, and she's really, Regan and the rest of the women are really just such a voice to be aware of.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, in terms of sort of types and styles and I guess, I don't know, purpose and goal of land acknowledgements, I felt like their land acknowledgement to me felt very manifesto-like in the best way, you know, and in relationship to that, the relationship between art and activism, you know, it was very much had that manifesto vibe. So I just wanted to, you know, show this image with the beautiful colored smoke and the banner that they unrolled, not invisible, and sort of, you know, that was very much in conversation with the piece, the text on the piece, which is hard to read here. This is one of the 4 sides. All the 4 sides have different texts. And so maybe this could be, I don't know if you want to say more about their statement.
Yeah, you know, there's a couple of things that were really interesting about this project. I think early on I realized, you know, my view of what it means to be Indigenous or what it means to acknowledge these histories it would be wrong if it was literally me speaking on behalf of everybody. So the idea of like inviting people in to complicate, to add to to make a cumulative voice of what becomes on the monument. And I've spoken to some people who have lived in New York City during like the AIM movements, when the AIM was really active, and like those stories. And I remember they would tell me these stories, and I was like, how amazing to have been there during these times. And I really think that IKC, they are those people of this time. So I was like, to have their like voice, their DNA, their presence, their image as a part of this artwork. And early on, I decided, I was like, I'm making or designing this structure, and then its meaning will become cumulative. Like, we're not starting off with an exact meaning. It will become cumulative as to who wants to take part, who takes part, and all those names and all those biographies go into what we're looking at. This is what the meaning will become. So the song, I chose to use 4 texts that I have used previously. This one is in Numbers Too Big to Ignore, which are lyrics excerpted from Helen Reddy's I Am Woman. And I actually used these words initially to speak to the missing and murdered Indigenous women's movement.
That's what their poster references.
That's what the
banner references as well.
And but you know, with everybody, I was like, I'm happy to step back as much as you would like me to. I'm happy to facilitate. I'm happy to participate. But I really didn't direct anybody, so we didn't even know which side they were going to choose. And I know that they were preparing that banner specifically to work with this text. And you know, I think we weren't even sure how many people were going to show up, you know, because everybody's coming after work or has childcare, or you know, and just busy New Yorkers in a pandemic. So it's like we weren't sure who was going to get there. And I'm really thrilled that you know, that this was able to kind of have visibility far beyond Manhattan, far beyond Long Island City. I know these images have circulated around quite a bit, not just within the art world, but also within the Native communities and Indigenous art world.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one of the things that I love about your use of text in this, and how this particular text evolved is, you know, you have this kind of historical point of like the 1970s feminist movement, which was at one stage that evolves and you know, hopefully keeps on evolving as like a pinpoint, but then you've transformed it with your own meaning. And I think that you know, it's open-ended enough that, I mean, I've heard people refer to this over the summer. They you know, thought it was in relation to Black Lives Matter, you know, and I think that there's something really powerful that it sort of keeps becoming transformed with these historical moments in time.
Yeah, I think we could talk to so many people on all sides on all political sides, and this phrase will mean something radically different from community to community. And I mean, I know we also talked about COVID deaths. We talked, you know, and I think that all of those things, again, I tried to use text in a way that that it can be self-reflexive, and it can be sort of projected upon by the viewer or the reader.
Yeah. So this is another side, respect Indigenous land. Do you want to talk a little bit about this text? I mean, I think it's in a way it's pretty straightforward, but I think it's an important point.
Well, it's funny, you know, like, again, like trying to figure out where I want to be on the spectrum between, like, you know, art for art's sake and politically driven work. And I think having taught for so many years, also trying to teach my students about what politics, what role politics play within art. You know, I think sometimes poetry gets in the way of something that needs to be said. You know, sometimes it needs to be much more direct and urgent. And I think Respect Indigenous Land was one that it was like, you know, just a pared down statement. And I think knowing that these were going to be directional, which one you would see first if you entered in one side of the park versus the other. And so in Numbers Too Big to Ignore was really important to me. Respect Indigenous Land was another one that I just wanted to be very like clear, you know. And also a reminder that, you know, even entering into any park, you're on Indigenous land, you know, and every part of this city, in this country, you are on Indigenous land. Absolutely. So this one is probably less negotiable for people, you know, to look at. It's like, oh no, he means respect Indigenous land.
Yeah, yeah. And I just am showing this image, and as I scroll through, I think people can start to pick up how the piece changed over time. You know, these are we pasted posters, so you know, in the initial days, it was really, really vibrant. Yeah. And then, you know, they age in time, I think in a really beautiful way. And then this image I just love because you can actually see the land, the earth, yeah, right down there. And then this one, powerful because we are different.
Yeah, powerful because we're different is, I mean, you know, to me, like I'm of that 90s period of time that was kind of like against authorship and sort of like, you know, when you make something, you send it out into the world and what happens to it happens to it. And so I don't know if this originates with me in my practice. I wrote these words and I was thrilled with how I can play with the word powerful. Mm-hmm. And it really is something that arrived to me thinking about, you know, years of trying to figure out how, you know, being referred to as like marginal, minority, you know, on the periphery or under-recognized, underrepresented, like these are all terms that are about, in many ways, describing your disempowerment, you know, and it takes its toll, I'll tell you, and I've had lots of conversations with other brown folks at this time, but we're sick of it. I don't want to be called a minority anymore. I understand what it means. I understand what it's referring to, but we're also always affirming that there is a majority that's central and we are not in the center at those decisions. And I really think it's important that we find language to center non-Western ideas and philosophies, maybe only specific to events, maybe only specific to certain works. But when it's all you hear your whole lifetime, it's not, to me, it's not great. And so I started thinking about these things that it's just like, you know, even someone who's really racist, they are afraid of my skin tone. They are afraid of my culture. They are afraid of these histories being centralized, being centered. And so, you know, that fear also turns into a recognition of power at some point. And so that's where these words emerged from. And I wanted to use words that either I had written primarily, so respect Indigenous land, powerful because we're different, and then the other, the future is present, is a phrase that I started using in 2013.
Yep, here we go. Yeah. And to me, that's kind of one of also a key sort of phrase in terms of thinking about this piece in general. And it's kind of speculative, future focus, you know, like not sort of repeating history and this kind of like, and making it rigid, but you know, using history in terms of the historical references you use, and then opening up and imagining, you know, this monument for people of the future, which I really appreciate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, time is like such a crazy thing. You know, there's sort of like day-to-day time, right? We go from like morning to noon to evening, but you know, it works differently for so many different people, and perceptions of time and perceptions of future, you know, to think about the way that Indigenous people have been portrayed historically through media, you know, it's such a narrow window that we get to be seen in. Right. And I think it doesn't actually, it ends. Like there's a date stamp on it, a time stamp on it, and it's not today, and it certainly isn't tomorrow. So I feel like, you know, as an artist and as a individual, and I was raised this way, actually, to think it's my responsibility to craft my own movement, you know, and so to me, the idea of forcing myself to think about future and forcing myself to think about, you know, what does it look like? Like, what does the future look like? I don't know, to be honest. And then you realize you're like, oh, but we are here and we're the ones responsible to craft it. We're the ones responsible to craft the possibility for it. And so that's where the words, "The Future is Present," started from in 2013. And it was, the original words were the title of a piece where I pulled a tree out from the frozen ground in Canada. And it was for an exhibition, and it had a piece of barbed wire that kind of grew through it. And I wrapped the tree in fabrics and beads. And then we suspended this tree, and it was painted with graphite, and it was beautiful. And it was about just this young tree that had fallen, and it was taking care of it. And then the end of the exhibition, we returned it to where we found it and burned it. And that title was "The Future is Present." And yeah, so I think for me, it starts with establishing like a belief, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, in relationship to monuments, you know, so many people talk about, you know, in making monuments now, you know, we create history now because we're always recreating history. But what I like about this phrase, "the future is present," in the present, we're also creating the future.
Yeah.
And certainly makers like you who are making artwork, making monuments, you know, these things go out into the world and they have effects on people, and, you know, in, you know, different ways, influence the future. So
Yeah. Well, it's so strange, you know. I think we live in a time that, you know, we live amongst so much commercialized stuff, right? So much kind of like manufactured stuff. And when you talk about the history of Indigenous people, you know, the language, the foods, the architectural aesthetics, the styles, materials, they all kind of like stand out because they're not things that we use every day now. So they have their own kind of like unique integrity amongst everything else going on. And I think that's where, you know, like I know Lou Cornum, who wrote the essay for the catalog, you know, has an interest in futuristic narratives or sci-fi narratives written by Native writers. And we spoke how this, like, it feels like a spaceship landed, you know, it's like sort of this, like it becomes a portal to some other space or time. And I think it's because it's like, it's just, you know, it has to do with it being up against this landscape, of Manhattan, you know, the buildings in the background. And it just is sort of stark against it. So yeah, I've actually learned quite a bit.
This image, I think, really captures that, you know, especially.
Yeah, I don't think I have these images. These look great.
Yeah, we'll get them to you. I mean,
I know.
It's a very photogenic piece, and then you see it from above, and it has this kind of like moment as if it's kind of hovering and landing, which, yeah, is extremely powerful.
And, you know, honestly, I'm trained as a painter. So it's like, you know how nervous I was when we were talking, and Chris, thank you, Chris, for figuring out how to get this built. And everyone who helped, you know, I get nervous at the thought of making something this big. And, you know, it was important to me that we made something that we could take down, we could store, we could reinstall. It wasn't going to be a throwaway piece. And I look at it now and I just think, I mean, in that process, we created design, architecture, function, and I think it's beautiful. You know, I think it's really, really amazing to work with.
Yeah, and this image is of the interior of the piece, and of course, originally we had hoped to have some public program inside that space, but you know, due to COVID, you know, we could not host groups of people inside a sort of not well ventilated area, but you know, you can see a little bit this interior of the structure, which is a good reminder that you know, the piece will have another life, and we're, you know, planning to travel it to the DeCordova in Lincoln, I think it's Lincoln, Massachusetts, and, you know, obviously the the structure is the same, so there'll be a lot of similarities, but one of the kind of exciting differences is this kind of curatorial work that you've been doing and inviting other Indigenous artists to, contribute to the piece in different ways. So did you want to give us a little teaser of that?
Yeah, I'm super excited. We don't have contracts signed yet or anything, but I think we have like confirmations that, I was really excited to reach out to Luzine Hill, who is an artist who I didn't know about until probably about 5 years ago. And she is a performance artist. She makes drawings and also installations. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia. She is Eastern Band Cherokee. And I was so excited to call her, and she was aware of it. It's like, and online media has made our kind of Indigenous world a little bit smaller. So she was aware of the piece, and I was just so excited. She's agreed to do both a performance, and she'll be lending some imagery for new posters to go onto the surface. Then Dana Claxton, who is a filmmaker and photographer, who is Lakota, and I believe she lives in Vancouver. And she does these amazing, she calls them fireboxes. They're these images that she's made of people working with her personal regalia. And she'll also be taking over a billboard at De Cordova. And then Eric Paul Reach, who is a young artist who has had a decent amount of attention for just having finished school a couple of years ago. He lives in Gallup, New Mexico. He's Dene. And he is just so excited to work on, he'll be doing a performance and also contributing to posters. And so now we're gonna move on to working with more artists inviting for posters. Because of the light and the fading, which I actually really like, but I really would like to continue creating this kind of quilt, patchwork aesthetic on the surface. So that's where we'll be working with, and that's where we're at right now. But I think we're also hoping, depending on what happens this year, as far as COVID, that we will be able to do some form of interior installation or programming.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping you might might say, since that was always a great space. And actually, the performers that you invited did kind of utilize that space in the sort of private live performances. So we have a little documentation of that, but it'll be great to see it as originally intended, as a kind of meeting space, because it's like the idea entering the house, right?
Yeah, and I think people should also know that it's, if COVID hadn't have been here present during this past year, excuse me, I was really excited to have much more intimate programming, storytellers and meals and food. And if people needed to use it for ceremony or for any sort of prayer, it's like that interior space is actually a significant part of the structure. And I think, hopefully as we move forward, we'll be able to use it more. But, even with Eric does some durational performance. And I said, he's the kind of artist who is quite happy if we installed some cameras on the inside, he might be performing with the doors locked inside of the structure.
Yeah, but it also just gives you the idea of like how different spaces inside and outside, and the kind of, it'll be interesting to see the kinds of things that you can do. The performers that we hosted at Socrates, it was very much like outward focused. And we'll be teasing those later. But yeah, one thing, just to bring it back to sort of the monument topic once again, was this, I wanted to ask you the question that was the first question that our education program put out to the public in relationship to this exhibition, which is, has a monument ever changed you?
Yes. And it was funny because we did a meeting yesterday where I knew about this question then, and at the time I thought no. And then today I was thinking about it more. They have stolen time from me. Monuments have stolen time from me, because when you see a monument and it offends you, there's no one to talk to. You know, you're looking at a piece of bronze, you're looking at a bronze image of something. And I always just felt like completely disregarded, completely invisible, as if I was like, you know, couldn't hear. And I just thought, there's been so many things in my life that have been like this, that even the moment that you see it and you make the decision to turn away and look away from it, it robs you of those minutes. And yeah, I think that is just, it's something that I think I'm sure actually many people have experienced that under different situations, but I know for me that's the answer that I arrived at today thinking about the question.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's it's a good thing to, you know, say out loud and articulate in terms of, you know, why certain monuments are coming down in this moment, and why we need to build new ones that look differently, you know, and that imagine differently.
Function differently, completely.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And then I just wanted to, you know, sort of show, you know, some of the answers that some of the people said, which I think is quite interesting. You know, someone replied, monuments have felt stuffy, but White Sands National Monument changed me, which you know, to me was quite interesting thinking about that, because some of the first national monuments were actually you know, natural phenomena or land works. I think Devil's Tower was actually the first national monument declared. And so yeah, I just think it's interesting to kind of return to this idea of land being, or the monument being intimately tied with the idea of land and site in so many ways. I didn't know if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, I know that's like, and I agree. You know, things like White Sands. You know, I think, you know, they existed before they were called monuments, and I think I feel like I'm somehow limiting them by calling them a monument. You know, that's just the kind of generosity of nature. You know, it's the generosity of time. It's the generosity of something that is giving you an allowance to kind of exist in relationship to it. So I think that those things are, you know, they're awe-inspiring. And I think, you know, the scale of them, the way that they make us kind of feel positioned in relationship to something else. And also they're usually so extraordinary. Natural monuments or these kinds of natural spaces, you know, I feel like they strike you with awe that makes you kind of self-reflexive, and they make you ponder just your relationship to things greater than maybe what we get distracted by on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, well, you know, yeah, there's kind of that feeling of sublime, of something greater.
Yeah, the world's amazing. You know, we keep getting in our way. We keep getting in our own way, trying to control it. But it is an amazing, amazing living being.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the thing about, I think, successful, what I might say a criteria for a successful monument is like a real relationship with the land. And I feel like you've done that because once you enter my house, it becomes our house. And you know, suddenly you become more present of the site and the land of Socrates. I think even just with the title, and thinking about, you know, in a way that I feel like we have that philosophy at Socrates, you know, that once you enter our house, or my house, it becomes our house, and that kind of shared space, and that feeling of commonality and sharedness of open space in general. So yeah, and I think this kind of image captures how the work does that.
I wanted to say one more thing before we go into questions.
Yep.
Which is that, you know, the title comes from Can You Feel It, right? But this is the phrase that always like makes me so happy and kind of sentimental. Let me just find it before I forget. Oh yeah, here we go. What is it that Jack does? Jack is the one who gives you the power to jack your body. Jack is the one who gives you the power to do the snake. Jack is the one who gives you the key to the wiggly worm. Jack is the one who learns you how to rock your body. Jack is the one that can bring nations and nations of all jackers together under one house. You may be black, you may be white, you may be Jew or Gentile. It don't make a difference in our house, and this is fresh. So that's sort of keep coming back to that. I've titled pieces numerous times by things that I find in the song, but it really is just like, it was such an anthem that made me think that the world would be different, you know?
Yeah.
So.
And that definitely, for me, has an element of the powerful because we are different feeling as well in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
So, well, before we open up to questions, I just wanted to sort of tease our upcoming programs. You know, we had mentioned that a big part of this piece was, you know, you're inviting other artists to present these live performances, which were live streamed. But, you know, next in our series, we'll actually be premiering the edited video documentation of the works. So do you want to say something about inviting Laura?
I mean, I just gush over Laura every time. I tell people all the time, I have the biggest crush on Laura and have for a number of years. And if you're not familiar with her, get familiar with her. She's incredible and such a force. And she really did everything that I hoped she would in coming to perform. She's a solo artist. She's White Mountain Apache is her background, and she is such a force of nature. And I don't know, she's like punk, she's love, she's ethereal. You know, I tell her, I'm just like, I feel like she just like takes me on a journey through like the galaxy, and like there's stars all around me, and then she brings me back down to earth.
Yeah.
That's as gushy as I get.
Yeah, it will be a really nice moment to relive that and see it in a sort of edited form. So I think that's in 2 weeks. I have all the dates at the end, but yeah, and then just wanted to Emily Johnson's performance.
Emily Johnson, incredible, and we have never worked together before to this degree, right? So this is really her performance. And I have to admit, I was really kind of along for the ride during the process, and seeing somebody, you know, Emily can be both really kind of, I don't know, inward, and she can become very small, but then to see her kind of like open up and become so powerful was really incredible. And the story was, it was about renewal and, you know, birth and babies and generations and travel and migration and prayer and healing. And it was really wonderful. And these amazing dancers that were there, really, there's so many talented people, obviously in New York City, but then there's, you know, they're because due to COVID, they're all here. No one's traveling. Right. So we had such incredible dancers, and they, I was kind of blown away, yeah, honestly, because, you know, this was a performance that I really had very little to do with. And I was just, yeah, couldn't have been happier with that.
Yeah, it was really amazing how she used this, you know, space of the pyramid as well, or the ziggurat as well, moving all around it. And, you know, just kind of, for me, it helped me rediscover what that piece was. So.
And even though we haven't seen Raven's performance yet, which we're hoping to do in March, yeah, you know, all three of these artists for me are people who, although we call their work art, although we look at it as performance, these are such genuine, I don't know, meditations, prayers. There, like, if you get a chance to be there, it's true. It's a very real experience.
Yeah. So we hope, and here we have the dates of all those premieres, and then you know, they'll actually be joining you in conversation to talk about that kind of work together. So you know, hear it straight from the artists.
Yeah.
But I think in the meantime, maybe we have questions.
Sure.
Yeah, we have a couple. I have from Christine. Was the use of wheat pasted posters an intentional choice? What's Jeff's take on the way the posters have weathered? And she mentions at night from the ferry, it almost looks ghostly.
The posters were an intentional choice. I have talked about for a long time, I really love posters. Like, I love the history of kind of DIY graphic design, which was actually another program that we had talked about earlier. Was I had met a woman who I can't think of her name right now, who wrote her thesis on DIY graphic design that emerged out of activism. And so that was one thing that I just, it's like I'm drawn to what I'm drawn to visually. So to have somebody kind of direct me in that way was really important. So I knew I wanted to use posters, and I didn't think anything about the sun fading. That was like, we ran into all sorts of issues early on where, I know John, I know all of the staff at Socrates was out there trying to make sure that we would open on time, and we got hit with huge rainstorms. But when the fading happened, I kind of feel like I love the color, but I was also kind of along for the ride to be like, let's see what happens. And then in conversation, we would talk about where to repair it, where to leave it. And also because I know it has another life and hopefully multiple lives ahead of it. I'm just learning, and so when and a lot, because I live upstate, a lot of the way I experience it is through photography. So when I see images, I'm always really, I haven't seen, I'm thrilled that people are experiencing it.
And there are so many images on Instagram alone, right?
Yeah. And I will say, going to De Cordova, we are leaving the posters that are on there. We're not removing them. We're leaving them on there as the base surface before we start adding anything on there. So that kind of residue of its short history will still be there.
Yeah, to me, it kind of keeps it in the talking about the present, and there's kind of a decollage technique about the sort of very recent history of its making.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's the archive. It's just another level of this energy that's been put into it. And speaking of De Cordova, DeWitt was asking, when will the piece open at De Cordova?
I feel like I'm going to get the dates wrong, but I believe it will be up midsummer. And then I'm also doing an exhibition on the galleries indoors. So that will open, I believe, in the fall. So that's when kind of the opening events will happen, is around then. So I think as we're talking now, Eric Paul Reach will be the first performance, and hopefully on the opening weekend.
Super exciting.
Yeah. Exciting.
And then one more question. Did creating this work at Socrates change your approach to collaborating with other artists?
For sure. I've made bodies of work in the past where other people's skills, their knowledge, their materials have been included, and people have wanted to rush to call it a collaboration. And I would always say, well, it's not really a collaboration, because I think collaboration is much more kind of moving through the process together and in conversation together. And, honestly, I feel like I don't even know what I would call my relationship to asking Emily or Laura or Raven to come and do something. I offer myself, meaning whatever it is I can do to help you realize something that you want to do. But I was really happy to take a support role. And I think that's been kind of a relief, to be honest. I mean, anyone who knows me personally knows that I have young children. And I will say the biggest lesson I have learned about parenting is step back. Give your children some room to breathe and let them figure it out. They need those skills in life. You're not going to be there to figure it out for them, and they can handle a lot. Obviously there's safety, and you want to make sure that, they're treating people well. But for the most part, it's kind of amazing to let them explore the world, and they're kind of incredible. So I kept thinking about that in terms of collaboration. I mean, I was like, here's 3 artists who I have so much respect for. And I was like, they don't need me. I was like, I'm here. If you need me, I am here. But truly, I was very happy to step back.
Yeah. Well, there was a platform,
Yeah.
So I, yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions?
That's it for now. I guess we should wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just like to thank you, Jeffrey,
Of course, thank you all.
giving us your
Oh,
time.
wait, we have a question coming in.
Oh, yes, question coming in. Okay, from Dread. One more question. Biting my nails.
I know. Yes, we also want to thank VIA. Without VIA's funding, we would have had a radically different structure.
Yeah.
I want to thank them so much. They've been really incredible.
Yeah, so thanks to VIA Art Fund. I'd also think for the programming of the series to Kavi Gupta, Sikama Jenkins, and Robert Projects LA. Were all crucial in these performances that you'll hopefully tune in for in the future.
Yeah. Before Dred's question is coming in, we have one from Maya on Facebook. If you're up for it, Judge.
Sure.
If you could pick a permanent home for this to live, where would it be, and would you change anything about it?
I would just want to keep traveling it around. I think it's totally meant to be nomadic, and it's totally meant to accumulate meaning. And ever since I moved to New York, as much as I love being an artist in this area, I really do. But the decentralizing of cultural hubs is something that is so important for the betterment of everything. And I think having something that can travel and people can experience in person, and also it gives me the opportunity to work with people, all over the place, and honestly, part of Eric is the youngest person. Like I said, I think I don't know where he's at, probably like 25, I'm guessing. But that generation and the generations who are paying attention to him, like it is an intergenerational kind of mission of the piece. Losing is a mature artist. Dana is an established artist, and I don't know what their ages are, but to connect those, to give people like a point to look at where you can see the spectrum. You can also see diverse tribal cultures, diverse cultures that are also specific, which I think is important to broaden what people think about when you think about the word Indigenous or Native.
Yeah. I love that answer. I mean, it was kind of everything at Socrates, by necessity is temporary. We don't have permanent artworks, but I think the idea of the traveling or moving monument is a really powerful one. And it's funny because when I was talking to Zyveria Simmons, who also has work in the Monuments Now show, she said something very similar when someone asked, where would you want this to be permanently? So brilliant minds think alike.
Just travel it around.
I remember that too. Okay, we have Dred Scott's question. You talked about Mississippian culture informing this project. Then you discussed collaborating with people from different tribes. Can you discuss how bringing different cultures together is part of this work, also history and contemporary within that?
Also history and contemporary within that. I think, bringing together people from different backgrounds, even if we just if I look at the biographies and what informs everybody who has taken part in this so far, right? So Raven, Laura, Emily, myself, the participants of Indigenous Kinship Collective, I started thinking about how as an artist, I've been obsessed with artist biographies since I was a teenager. And it's kind of what got me to move to New York, because I was just like, I want to be a part of that. Like that just seems like the most interesting world I could be a part of. And I think there's a couple of things. Like one, that biography, I hope that people are just like, okay, who is Indigenous Kinship Collective? Even if, like, let's say they don't exist like 2 or 3 years from now, or if they morph into something else. Like, there's these different histories that we need to mark, we need to photograph, we need to have evidence that they existed, we need to have evidence that there was voices, that they were women, that how they represented themselves. To me, it's just that simple in many ways, you know. And again, I am not somebody who is going to create kind of like a specific directory. Like, well, that's not true. I actually am working on some projects now where I feel like I have to take some of that on. I have to collect the information so it can be distributed. But that's one thing. And I think it also kind of breaks up the kind of collective nature of the language that we use to describe Indigenous communities. It needs to be more specific. People need to realize that how our communities are politicized in this country, like how we are actually separated, and the demographic numbers of those populations are not collected to have a powerful, strong voice in this country, right? We're very much like Mississippi Choctaw may have very little to do with the Lakota, you know, and so that's one thing. The other thing, also history and contemporary within that, you know, I did grow up wanting to reject tradition. I won't say history. I wanted to reject tradition, partially because I was not raised within it, you know, so it's not something that was kind of taught to me. And as probably in my 20s, I began to realize it's not something that you just step into lightly at all. Like, people who are raised within tradition, it starts when you are a baby and you are literally trained for specific things to function in your community. So I started like thinking about, you know, like, well, who am I within that structure? You know, I'm somebody that in many ways am untethered because of the way that I grew up, you know, and I have movement and I have fluidity, and I was born into moving through different communities, and I had to find a way to take responsibility for that position. And I think that's a position that a lot of people share. And so for me, part of the challenge has been, how do I make it make sense? It was never meant to be didactic, you know, historical and future and present. And so a lot of the things I think about are, how do I create kind of structures of thinking that allow for those things to coexist and kind of fluidly move in and out of each other. And that's what I hope I'm trying to do. You know, that's the thinking that goes into making for me.
Well, that's a very good question and a very good answer that perhaps we can end on, unless do you have any final thoughts you'd like to share?
You know, I think there's just, you know, as far as where we're at right now, we're like, as a country and as a people, there's so much work to be done. I've learned so much over this last year. I've been triggered so many times and had to figure out what is it that's triggering me. I think, you know, I understand a lot of people are happy about today's events, but I really feel like we have opened up so many things that we're at the beginning of, things that have been in the works for so long, that finally some of it has been cracked open, maybe to a level that people haven't experienced before. Don't be afraid of it. We all have to get comfortable having really complicated, difficult conversations. And you know, it's like this vision of equity is just so important. I'm going to give a plug for this book, Cast, which I think many people probably are aware of. Brilliant. You know, her description and kind of analogy of living on this land, you know, you can't say, I didn't enslave people. You can't say, I didn't colonize people. This is like an old house that you live in, and you've inherited all of its problems. And I just think it's like, that's the deal. Like, we're all responsible for the problems, and we all have to find ways to repair them, or we just are going to continue to suffer the ways that they manifest and come back at us.
That is a beautiful metaphor that kind of comes back to the title of the piece, that, you know, repairing the house, and that's Isabel Wilkerson's Cast.
Yeah, it's a beautiful book, amazing book. All right, but yeah, I'm gonna say that, and then thank you to everyone who's helped me to do this, and everyone who joined us tonight.
All right. Well, enjoy the rest of the evening.
Yes.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Before we go, just want to have a few wrap up announcements. Thank you guys both, Jess and Jeff, for your time and the beautiful and enriching conversation. For everyone, this is the kickoff of the Jeffrey Gibson screening series that we will be doing in the next weeks. You can find all the information on our website. Coming up, you'll be able to see those performances that we had this summer. Go ahead, Jeff.
I also just want to say a huge thanks to Chelsea and Itziyad and Tristan and Aaron, the people who are behind the cameras. Like, really, please do join us. They did such an incredible job. And one of the goals with the videos was really to almost make it its own fantastic experience for people who couldn't be there. So I think, yeah, thrilled. So
yeah, this is not the live stream content. This is expertly edited, so with drone footage. So we'd love for everyone to check it out. Laura Ortman will be on February 3rd, followed by Emily Johnson February 17th. Then we'll have a second artist talk with Jeff and Laura and Emily, as well as Raven Chacon, who, fingers crossed, we will wrap up this entire series with a live stream performance right before Monuments Now will close on March 23rd. And the park is open, so if you are able to visit safely, please do, to see Jeff's piece as well as the rest of the pieces in Monuments Now. Socrates is open 7 days a week, 9 a.m. to sunset. And you heard it here first. We're kicking off a series of virtual talks and Instagram takeovers with our incredible cohort of 2020 artist fellows. And their work makes up the call and response portion of Monuments Now. So we're going to begin with Patrick Costello, Jenny Polak, and Aya Rodriguez Izumi, Wednesday, January 27th at 6 p.m. And all the info is on the website. I know that was a lot. Thank you, everybody, for joining us and for sharing this evening together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So much.